So when you Google this question, because it when you start to go down the money rabbit hole, this is one of the first things you start to think about, like what is money? What Why did we go off the gold standard, and why did dollar bills used to say legal tender, and what does that even mean? So most people my age and younger, right, are Googling everything. So we just go to Google. And one of the first search results when you type in our gold and silver are the only legal money is
Mhm.
this article that, and I sent this to you. So I'm going to ask you about it, and hope we kind of covered a lot of this already, but maybe we'll succinctly give the answer. But you search for that, the article comes up and it lays out the case that this is a myth or a conspiracy theory. And the argument they use is that the term lawful money was never defined. And the article says that the greenbacks, Lincoln's fiat currency, was defined as lawful money and legal tender, in quotes. And then in the 1800s, there was no definition of lawful money or legal tender. This is what they say. And they were the same thing. So lawful money and legal tender were, I guess, the same thing they're trying to argue. And then the article says that prior to 1933, Federal Reserve notes were redeemable for, quote, gold or lawful money, unquote, end quote. And then they argue that it means that gold is not lawful money. And then they say that after 1933, all forms of U.S. money were given legal tender status. Since gold redeemability ended in 1933, then they argue that the Constitution only limits states, but not Congress, and Congress declared other things as legal tender. So did you catch all that? Like, it's a bit of a mind bend for people like me to walk through that, but do you think that argument is just totally subjective, or like how are they able to make this argument? Because what you told me sounds like you got a lot
Well, it's
backing it.
nonsense. Other than the statement, see if I can remember exactly how they put it. Other than the statement that since 1933, all forms of United States coin and currency, including Federal Reserve notes and national bank notes, are legal tender.
Right.
There's actually a statute that says that. All
Right.
right. Other than that, and that's simply a statement of what the statute says. That doesn't mean that that's constitutional. There are all sorts of problems with what that statute does. All right.
Which
The rest of
statute
it's
is that?
nonsense. Excuse me?
Which statute is that?
That's 31 USC, what, 510,
Oh, I mean,
5103.
like what was it about? Why did it get passed? What was the reason for passing that? Do you remember?
Well, it was the concept that they were going off a limited gold standard, and they wanted to make Federal Reserve notes legal tender, which they were not under the Federal Reserve Act. They were redeemable in lawful money or gold in the Federal Reserve banks and in gold alone by the Treasury. So as I said before, you could go to the Federal Reserve Bank and say, here's my Federal Reserve note, $20 Federal Reserve note, I want to redeem this. They could have given you silver certificates. They could have given you a gold coin. They could have given you silver coinage, which we had still circulating, silver dollars. Or they could have said, well, we're not going to give you gold. You could have asked for gold, and they would have said, no, we're not going to give you gold. We're going to give you these other things. You could have withheld your $20 and gone to the Treasury and demanded the gold. And then the Treasury would have gone to the Federal Reserve and demanded the gold. We went through that circle before, all right?
Right. Yeah.
So what they're saying there, what you're quoting, I guess, from Wikipedia or something along that line, is confused. I mean, they don't understand what actually was happening. The term lawful money, the idea that the term lawful money was not defined anywhere prior to 1862 is complete nonsense. The state bank laws contained this concept, lawful money, through and through, because they were trying to control what the state banks could use for their reserves. So they wanted the state banks to use what they defined as lawful money. You find in many of these state statutes, they define it as gold and silver coin of the United States. In fact, some of the state statutes are still there defining lawful money as gold and silver coin of the United States. This was a control
Okay.
to control the state banks, and the state banks then came to Congress and said, we want these terms, or this term, we want lawful money put into this statute so that we, the banks, can use this legal tender paper currency that you're about to admit as part of our reserves under our state statutes. We don't want these simply to have a federal authority behind them. We want to be able to use them under our state laws. That's why that was put there. Legal tender was in the first Coinage Act, the Mintage Act of 1792.
That was going
Gold
back
and the
to
silver
the
coins were to be legal tender for their value. And what that meant was that if I have a contract and it says it's going to be paid in $10, what is the legal tender for that $10? What can the debtor put forward that the creditor has to accept in payment of that debt? Or if he takes that case to court, the court will say, too bad for you, that's what you have to accept. You're not getting interest or any penalties or anything else. And so a statute would say, well, of course, the silver dollar is a dollar. It's legal tender for a dollar. It's defined as the dollar. The gold coinage was legal tender for so many dollars based upon the exchange rate between gold and silver in the marketplace. So this was not an attempt to cheat people. It was an attempt to specify what a proper legal payment was. Later on, legal tender becomes an attempt to cheat people. Now, instead of getting my gold coin under my contract with you, you come to me in 1863, or 1865, 1866, when there was terrific depreciation of the legal tender paper currency, and you say, oh, I have a piece of paper here that's legal tender for $10, and instead of paying me the $10 that I'm owed in silver, you pay me the $10 in paper, which has a lower purchasing power. So I have been cheated by this mechanism. Originally, legal tender was an attempt not to cheat people, but to specify what was going to be paid under that contract legally with respect back to some statutory standard or constitutional standard when we're talking about silver. Legal tender then became a mechanism for cheating people. And it's been that ever since.
So is it now, you're saying that the legal tender had precedence in the earlier laws in the 1700s than this one, this,
Oh, absolutely. They don't
this,
know, when they say this, they don't know what they're talking about. They don't
so
know what
when,
or they're trying to lie to people. It's one or the other. But
well, it's kind of confusing, right? Because unless you're like a constitutional expert like you, it's really hard to understand. Like, okay, well, who's telling the truth about what is legal tender? What does legal money even mean when you're trying to look at it
well,
constitutionally?
I gave you the simple answer is if you go back to the
The
Mint
Spanish
Act of
mill dollar,
1792, which anyone can find the Mint Act of 1792. You go to the United States statute books, it's right there. Open it up, and you will see the use of the term legal tender.
right?
And what it meant was, oh, if you have a debt for $1, this silver coin is legal tender for $1. If it's in gold, then it's this ratio that has to be calculated, arithmetic, right? That's all it was. And the point of it was, you see this when the gold appreciated versus silver between 1792 and in the 1830s. And there was an act passed in 1834, Coinage Act, which changed the weight of the gold coins to take into account the change in the relative purchasing powers of gold and silver.
Okay.
And in that statute, they specifically said, oh, the earlier coins, which had a different weight, will have a different legal tender value than the new coins, which have this new weight. What they were trying to do was very, very carefully make sure that in the ratio between silver and gold, people were getting the full monetary value.
That makes
You
sense.
see that right there and there. And if they had believed in 1834 that they could have used this concept of legal tender the way, whatever source you're reading suggests it could be used, none of that would have occurred in the 1834 statute. All you have to do is look at this. All you have to do is read the statute. This doesn't require monetary history. You don't have to take a course at Harvard in monetary. Yeah, you'd be in big trouble if you took one at Harvard monetary. But you don't have to take a course in monetary history. All you have to do is go back and start reading these statutes and you see what they did. And there's this break in 1862 with the legal tender paper currency. And that's where the thing, it almost breaks down because at the end of the war, they came back and they said, no, we have to go and correct this. And it's not until you get into the early 20th century with the idea of central banking, which that's where the banking becomes complicated because they set up a national banking system in 1862 and 63. That's the precursor of the Federal Reserve. It had a lot of instability in it. They come up with the concept of the lender of the last resort. They create the Federal Reserve System as being the stabilizing operation for this whole banking cartel. And between 1913 and 1933, they inflate the currency sufficiently so they cause the banking collapse and the Great Depression. All right. Remember, the Federal Reserve System was enacted on the theory, the promise, that this was a scientific method for ending depressions and ending large-scale inflations. That was what was promised by Congress and the bankers. They put it in 1913, just in time for World War I, right? They have the first depression at the end of World War I, 1921, 1922. They have the big one in 1932 and 1933. That's all you need to know about the system. The
Right.
scientific promise was bunkum, right? It was falsified by events. And then they had to correct that. And the way they had to correct that was to take what? They took the governor, the thing that controls the speed of the engine, doesn't let the engine go beyond a certain RPM. They took that away. And what was that? That was the gold redemption control.
Right.
They took gold redemption control away. They took gold redemption control away first within the United States. They kept it internationally because we were the top dog internationally, especially after World War II. And then when our inflationary policies ran amok with Johnson especially, and the Great Society, Nixon had to come in and close the so-called gold window in 71. Why? Because people like Charles de Gaulle in France were saying, give us the gold. We're going to
Right.
reduce our Federal Reserve balances for gold. And Nixon realized if we do that, we're finished, right? So we had
Yeah.
to control that. And then by the time you get into as I said before, 1985 with the Gold Commission, they realized that domestically and internationally as well, most people had no knowledge of or were not interested at all in making gold clause contracts.